I'm starting to see why Praktijk Superkracht chose that name, superpower. These therapies really do seem to unlock hidden potential.
They do.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
It's great to be here.
Today we're looking at something that I think a lot of parents will find really interesting and probably really helpful too.
Oh, for sure. It's something that comes up all the time.
Yeah, so we're talking about helping kids, especially those who are maybe struggling a little bit emotionally or, socially.
Exactly. When they're just hitting those bumps in the road, and as a parent, you're like, what do I even do?
Right. Like, where do I even start? So what's cool is we're going to look at some really unique approaches, maybe even therapies you haven't heard of.
And they're all about empowering kids to find their own strength. Instead of fixing them, it's about helping them flourish.
I love that. Okay, so the practice we're focusing on is called Praktijk Superkracht. It's in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
And they specialize in working with kids between 3 and 12.
Yeah, and their whole philosophy is built around this idea that every child has superpowers. It's about unlocking those, which is so positive, right?
Right. It's such a refreshing way to look at it.
Yeah.
Instead of what's wrong, it's like, wait, what strengths can we build on? Okay, so Praktijk Superkracht uses 3 main approaches: play therapy, OKI-B, and MEP.
3 very different but very powerful approaches.
Let's unpack these one by one, starting with play therapy. I think most parents can relate to the idea that kids communicate best through play.
Oh, absolutely. It's their natural language.
Right.
And that's exactly what play therapy taps into.
So instead of saying, hey, kids, sit down and tell me why you're upset.
Right. Exactly. You give them toys, art supplies, puppets, and let them express themselves through those.
So it's not about, the parent or the therapist analyzing every little thing the child does.
It's about creating a safe space for them to just be and to work through things on their own terms.
And that can be really powerful for all sorts of issues, right?
Oh, yeah. Low self-esteem, trouble expressing emotions, behavioral problems, even coping with trauma, like a death in the family or divorce, bullying, all kinds of things.
Wow. Okay. So that's play therapy, harnessing the power of play. Now this next one, OKB, stands for parent-child interaction and movement play.
So the name itself already tells us that parents are getting involved.
Yeah, which is interesting.
Right, and this is often used when the parent-child relationship itself is feeling strained. There's conflict or communication breakdowns.
It's like they're both hitting a wall.
Exactly. And the goal is to help smooth things out, build a more positive connection, and address the child's needs, but all through play.
So I'm picturing like family game night in the therapist's office.
Well, it can involve games and activities, but
Yeah.
here's the really cool part. They use video recordings
Huh?
of the parent and child interacting during play. And then the therapist helps the parent analyze their own behavior.
Whoa, wait. So you're not just playing. You're getting feedback on how you're interacting with your child.
Precisely.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I can see how that could lead to some serious light bulb moments for parents.
Oh, absolutely. Because often parents don't realize the subtle ways they might be contributing to a conflict or how their own stress is affecting the child.
Right. We don't always see it.
Exactly. This helps them pinpoint those things and make real changes.
Okay, so we've got play therapy, using play as expression. OKI-B, focusing on the parent-child bond through play. And now bring on the futuristic-sounding one, MEP,
Mind-eye power.
mind-eye power. This one might sound a little out there, but it's actually based on some solid research. You might have heard of EMDR, eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing.
It's getting more and more well known.
Yeah, the one where you follow the therapist's finger with your eyes.
That's it. MEP is in that same family using specific eye movements, but the goal is to create really deep, lasting change.
Okay, so what kinds of things can it help with?
Well, it can be used for anxieties, unprocessed emotions, negative beliefs that might be holding a child back.
Wait, so you're saying eye movements can help with all that?
Right.
What's the thinking behind that?
It has to do with how our brains are wired. Specific eye movements can actually stimulate different parts of the brain. And the idea is that this helps to create new neural pathways. It's like rewiring old unhelpful patterns.
So, for example, a child who's constantly anxious MEP could help their brain create new pathways that lead to a calmer state.
Exactly. It can even be used for things like the lingering effects of trauma, limiting thoughts, even addictions in some cases.
This is already blowing my mind, and we've only just scratched the surface.
It's pretty incredible stuff. And when you think about it, all 3 of these approaches, play therapy, OKB, and MEP, are tapping into the power of the mind-body connection in different ways.
Wow, that's a really cool connection I hadn't even thought about.
It's fascinating how much our minds and bodies influence each other.
So for those parents listening who are thinking, okay, this sounds promising, but What does it actually look like in practice?
Yeah. How did these therapies actually play out in real life?
Well, you're in luck because when we come back in part 2, we're going to dive into some real-life examples of how these therapies have helped children.
We'll look at specific cases and see the amazing transformations that are possible.
And we'll also talk about how these approaches can benefit parents themselves. Because let's face it, parenting is a journey.
It is. And everyone needs a little support along the way.
So stay tuned for part 2.
We'll be right back. So before we went to a break, which we didn't do, of course, because this is a podcast, we were talking about these 3 amazing approaches.
Play therapy, OKI-B, and MEP.
And how they can really help kids who are, struggling.
Yeah, and I think what's so exciting is that they each offer a different way of tapping into a child's world, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Play therapy works with their natural language of play.
Right.
OKB strengthens that crucial parent-child connection.
Yeah.
And then MEP dives into that mind-body connection to create lasting change.
It's like they each hold a piece of the puzzle
They do.
for a child's well-being. But let's get down to brass tacks. Can you give us some real-life examples of how these therapies have actually helped kids overcome challenges?
Yeah, of course. So there's this case study from Praktijk Superkracht that really stuck with me. It involved this young boy who had witnessed a terrible car accident.
Oh, gosh.
And he was having nightmares, anxiety, the works. Talking about it directly just wasn't working for him.
That makes sense, especially for a child. Putting those feelings into words can be really tough.
Exactly. But through play therapy, he was able to use toy cars to recreate the accident scene. It allowed him to process those fears and anxieties on his own terms in a way that felt safe.
It's amazing how something as simple as playing with cars can be so therapeutic. So did he eventually stop having nightmares?
Over time, yes. His anxiety decreased too. And this is just one example. Play therapy can also be incredible for developing social skills, learning to manage emotions, and even building self-esteem.
Wow, that's a pretty impressive list. Now, what about OKB? Any inspiring stories from families who've tried that approach?
Definitely. I remember reading about a single mom who was at her wit's end with her teenage daughter.
Oh, boy.
They were constantly fighting, and the mom felt like she was losing control.
That's a situation I think a lot of parents, single or not, can relate to. That feeling of helplessness when communication just breaks down.
Absolutely. But OKB helped them rebuild their relationship, not through lectures or punishments, but by finding ways to connect through play.
Huh, interesting.
They learned cooperative games and activities that required them to work together and communicate effectively.
So it shifted the dynamic from fighting against each other to working together. I like that.
Exactly. And remember that video feedback component we talked about earlier? That was a game changer for this mom. She could literally see how her reactions were contributing to the conflict and learn new ways to respond.
Talk about an aha moment. That's powerful stuff. It's not just about changing the child's behavior. It's about giving parents tools to change their own approach.
Right, which ultimately benefits everyone.
Exactly. Okay, now let's move on to MEP. How have you seen it used to help children, especially given its unique approach?
Well, one area where it's shown incredible promise is in treating anxieties and phobias.
Okay.
There was this case of a young girl who was terrified of dogs, couldn't even be near one. Through MEP, she was able to reprocess the traumatic experience that caused the fear.
So instead of avoiding dogs forever, she was able to change her brain's response to them. Did it actually work?
It did. She gradually overcame her phobia.
I'm starting to see
MEP
why
can
Praktijk
desensitize the
Superkracht
brain's response
chose
to
that
triggers
name,
and create
superpower.
new positive associations.
These therapies really do seem
It's like
to
hitting a reset
unlock hidden
button on those
potential.
old fear patterns. And the
Wow,
best part is
that's
MEP
truly
can be
amazing.
applied to so many issues. Performance anxiety, test taking, stress, social phobias, the list goes on.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about how play therapy, OKB, and MEP can help children, but you mentioned earlier that they can also benefit parents.
Right, because parenting is not always easy.
It's not.
And these methods can offer parents validation, support, and hope.
I think that's a really important takeaway for our listeners. It's not about being a perfect parent. It's about being willing to seek help and learn new ways to connect with your child. And that's something to be proud of, not ashamed of.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that everyone needs support sometimes, parents included. So we've covered a lot of ground here, real-life examples of how these therapies have helped, how they benefit parents as well. What are some key takeaways you think our listeners should remember as we head into the final part of our deep dive?
Well, first off, I think it's important to remember that seeking help for your child is a sign of strength, not weakness. And these methods are not just for serious issues. Even mild anxieties or challenges can be addressed.
That's a good point. And I think it's worth emphasizing that these approaches are all about empowerment, connection, and building on a child's natural strengths.
When we come back for the final part of our deep dive, we'll talk about how these methods can be applied in different situations and leave you with some food for thought as you continue your parenting journey.
We'll be right back.
So we're back, and I'm really eager to wrap up our deep dive into these really fascinating therapies.
Me too. I think there's so much here for parents to take away and really think about.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up, what are some of the key takeaways you think our listeners should walk away with?
Well, I think the most important thing is to remember that seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
Right. Not a sign that you failed as a parent.
Exactly. It shows you're truly committed to your child's well-being
Yeah.
and that you're willing to do whatever it takes to support them.
And these methods, they're not just for, quote unquote, serious problems.
Right. They can be helpful for any child who's struggling, whether it's with their emotions, their behavior, their social interactions.
Maybe they're having trouble making friends or they get overwhelmed really easily.
Yeah, these approaches can make a real difference.
And I think it's important to point out that these therapies are all about empowering the child and the parent too.
Absolutely. It's about building resilience, fostering connection, enhancing communication, and ultimately it's about strengthening that parent-child bond.
Yeah, you're not just fixing the child. You're giving them and their parents the tools to face those challenges together.
Exactly. It's about equipping both children and parents with what they need to navigate those ups and downs of life.
So for our listener, who is probably a parent actively searching for ways to support their child,
Yeah.
what advice would you give them?
Well, first I would say be open to exploring different approaches.
Don't be afraid to think outside the box.
Right, and trust your gut instinct.
Huh?
Every child is unique. What works for one might not work for another. It's a journey of discovery.
That's such a crucial point. There's no magic wand, no one-size-fits-all solution.
And I think it's also important to be patient
With
with yourself and with your child. Change takes time, and seeking support along the way is okay. Parenting is a marathon, not a sprint.
So true. And remember, Praktijk Superkracht offers a free consultation.
Mm-hmm.
This is a great way for parents to learn more about these therapies, ask questions, and see if they might be a good fit for their child's needs.
Yeah, it's a no-pressure way to explore the possibilities. We'll include all their contact information in the show notes.
Perfect. So as we close out our deep dive, is there a final thought-provoking question you'd like to leave our listeners with?
How about this? What hidden superpowers might your child unlock through the power of play connection and these mindful techniques?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
A beautiful reminder that every child has incredible potential. Sometimes it just needs a little help to shine through.
And as parents and caregivers, we have this amazing opportunity to guide them on that journey of self-discovery.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into helping children thrive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll be back soon with more explorations into topics that matter to you. Until then, keep seeking, keep learning, and keep empowering yourselves and your loved ones.